Welcome to Webster Now with your host, Garrett Wagner.
What if I told you that in Webster, how something gets said can matter just as much as what gets said? Because the last town board meeting, something happened that raised a much bigger question than any one vote, project, or policy. And it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it pointed to something that sits underneath a lot of what's happening in this town right now. How does something actually get on the record? And maybe more importantly, who has access to that process and who doesn't? That question connects to a lot more than just one moment. And we're going to look at why some decisions keep coming up, don't seem to move forward, including the climate smart community vote that's now stalled again. We're also going to talk about the cell tower discussion. This is a big one. We have strong public reaction on one side and legal and technical realities butting up against the other, and where the way information gets into the record really matters. Then we're going to shift gears a little bit, because not everything should be complicated. This is a place in this town where participation is simple, clear, and can actually work the way people expect it to. Before we get there, we need to start with the foundation. Let's start the process. Because if that part isn't clear, nothing else really works the way it should. Now, just a quick reminder. Everything here today is my perspective only. Nothing here said reflects official town policy or action. So let's get into it. At the April 16th town board meeting, something happened I think residents should understand because it goes beyond any one issue or project. It raises a really simple, basic, dare I say, boring question. How does something actually get added to the public record in our town government? And yes, I know. This is about what you really want to know about, the details of public meeting law. We're going to get into it because this is important. So here's what happened. During the discussion on the Climate Smart Communities program, the town supervisor, Alex, stated that he was placing an email into the official record based on a text he received. Now, this is where it's important to slow things down and be really clear. That individual involved was not just any regular resident. And people in the audience made that point clear. This person is the head of the Webster Democratic Party and also serves on the planning board in Webster. And that matters, not because of intent, but because of appearance.
Something seems really sketchy about this, and I'm not just saying that because I have a hard time with Australians.
Because it raises a simple question. Is getting something into the public record a process that's equally accessible to everyone? Or does it depend on access? And that led to questions from the board live during the meeting. What is the actual process for something to be entered into the public record? Is texting an official now a valid way to do that? If so, does everyone have that same ability? And then is the official making the decision what does and doesn't go on the record? Because if that's the case, that represents a significant shift in how the process works. And here's where it becomes even more important to clarify. After the meeting, a resident submitted a FOIL request for that exact text message. And what it showed was the message did not actually request the email be added to the record. It simply said the email wanted to be shared with the full board. And those are two very different things. Subtle but different. And to put that in context, the town board has been receiving more emails from residents than in a long time, relating to both the Xerox Solar project and the Verizon cell phone projects. And none of those emails ended up on the public record. Now, this isn't about specific message or even who sent it. It's about something even more fundamental when we boil it down. Whether the process is consistent and fair for everyone in Webster. Because most residents don't have direct access to text officials. Most residents don't know that texting could be a way of getting something formally onto the record. Probably shouldn't. And most people reasonably assume there's a standard public method for submitting their input. Because if different rules apply depending on access, that just creates confusion, unequal participation, and perhaps most importantly, skepticism about how decisions are being informed. Now, during the meeting, the town attorney, Kyle Taylor, stepped in, not once, but twice, and clarified something important. Materials should be submitted through official channels only, not via text messages. Now, for those who want to know, the town website has a form you can fill out, but we've been told that process is a little clunky. So if it's easier, you can email the town clerk at townclerk@websternewyork.gov. But remember, the process to get information on the record is not via texting for a simple reason. Because official channels create an audit trail that everyone can see. They ensure consistency, and they protect the integrity of the process. At its core, this comes down to a simple principle. The public record should be built through a process that is transparent and equally accessible to everyone. Not based on who you know, not based on how you communicate or text to the supervisor. Now, this isn't about assigning intent, but this is about making sure the process is clear. Because when the process is clear, that builds trust with residents, which is a good thing. And it allows decisions to be stronger and bring our community together. And there's also been a commitment to what's been called radical transparency. And this decision and conversation should only happen and be on the record. So it's fair to ask, what does radical transparency look like to you as the resident in this town? Because how decisions are made matters more than just how those decisions themselves come up. And that starts with a process everyone has access to and understands that's neutral and not party dependent. And once something makes it on the record, it's only the first step. So with that, the next question becomes, what happens when feedback is documented? The process itself isn't working the way it should. Because that's what we've been seeing with the Climate Smart Community Program. It was up for a third time before the board for a vote. In going to the meeting, it was already clear there weren't enough votes for it to pass. And it was suggested that the workshop happened that night. In 2 weeks, there'd be a vote on it. That communication was done ahead of time, but the item remained on the agenda anyways. This is a New York State program that offers access to grants and technical assistance. Some of those grants are relatively small. Some can go up in the millions of dollars depending on the project. It's free to join, and the town can opt out every 5 years. It's been a big sticking point. So on the surface, it sounds straightforward. But in practice, it does take some coordination. It takes some time. It takes some planning. And it takes answering some pretty reasonable questions about what happens after you opt in. And those are the kind of questions being raised again. Some of these have been raised before. So instead of forcing a vote that wasn't going to pass, there was a motion to reschedule it, to take 3 weeks, because it's a 3-week cycle this time, to get answers and come back better prepared. The motion was made, it was seconded, and it needed one more vote. But Alex voted it down. And that raised a reasonable question. If the goal is to move something forward, why not take the time to get it to a place where it can actually pass? Because rescheduling wasn't a no. It was a path to getting to a yes with better information. Instead, the process moved forward. And there's always the same outcome we've seen multiple times now. And this is where a bigger pattern starts to come into focus. Because this wasn't just one vote. We've been keeping tabs. How many failed resolutions we've had since the new board took office at the start of 2026. Every time something comes forward that isn't quite ready, there is an alignment. Every time a vote happens before the groundwork is really there, the number goes up. 1, 2, 3. Maybe it was just an adjustment period. But then it kept going. 4, 5, 6. And we started to pay a little bit more attention. Because it's not isolated anymore. It's a pattern. And the Climate Smart Community Vote, that's another one. And when you step back and look at it more broadly, the number's now 10. 10 votes that weren't ready, that didn't pass, that needed more time. And that's not about whether the ideas are good or bad. It really reflects whether the process is being followed to get the items to a point where they can actually pass, or is the board discussion a first step in a longer journey? Because when things move too quickly, when there's pressure put on something on the agenda before it's fully worked through, you don't get efficiency. You get delays. You get repeated conversations. And you get a situation where the same issues come back without full resolution. We look at our Tom Flaherty, the prior town supervisor, failed vote maybe once or twice in his 6-year tenure. Yet somehow the current board has let that number climb to 10 in the first 4 months. And that's what I mean when we keep talking about speed government. It feels like a lot of things are moving, but most of them are actually not going anywhere. And from a resident perspective, it can be frustrating because you're seeing the same topic without clear answers, without closure, board debate, asking questions, and the conflict coming up real time, right? The role of the town board is to ask questions, to work through the details, and to make sure that when something comes up for a vote, it's ready on behalf of the residents. Not to push something forward and then react like this, we don't get the support. Now, there are legitimate reasons to pause in the face of speed government. and think critically about the Climate Smart Communities Initiative before pushing it forward. And those considerations are exactly what I want to discuss with you as your elected official, because I personally got many questions on this program. I've heard from many of you asking where I stand on the Climate Smart program. So I want to take a moment and answer that directly, because it matters. For me, I support the idea of the program and the opportunity to access grant funding that can benefit the town of Webster without adding to the burden of our current taxpayers. But, and this is important, I'm an even stronger proponent, just good governance. And this is what good governance means to me. When you have a reasonable question on the table, questions about capacity, priorities, implementation, those questions deserve clear answers before a decision is made. Because that's our role as board members. We're elected to ask questions, to understand the implications of our decisions, and to make sure we're prepared to follow through on what we approve. And when time isn't a limiting factor, when the difference is simply taking time to get the answers right, that's time just well spent. Because every decision that we get to make carries responsibility with it. And the goal isn't just to say yes or no. It's to make sure we're ready for what comes after that. Because when that next part isn't clear, the consequences don't just stay in the boardroom, they show up in our community and they impact all of us. All right, having fun? It's a blast, right? So we talked about how information gets into the process. What happens when the process itself isn't working the way it should? That's where the ongoing cell phone tower discussion comes in, because this is an issue where you're seeing a lot of engagement, a lot of residents showing up, a lot of strong opinions, and a lot of real concern, which is valid. People are worried about how these towers are going to impact their neighborhood, their property values, their quality of life. Those concerns are valid, and they should absolutely be part of the conversation. But here's where it's important to understand something that isn't always obvious. The process for these decisions doesn't just exist at the town level. It exists at the federal level too. And that changes how these decisions get made. The goal isn't just to be heard. It's to make sure you're saying something that can actually be used in the decision. Because the argument has to be tied to the existing legal framework. There's a federal law called the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And I know some of you raise questions that that law is too old, but that's the law on the books. And that law basically says towns like Webster can regulate where cell towers go, but they can't deny them outright without a valid, supportable reason. There are limits.
Know your limits, Master Wayne.
That man has no limits.
Well, you do, sir.
And those limits have been shaped over time by court decisions. And that's how our court systems work, right? There's a law, there's decisions, there's case law. And one of the most important ones came out of New York State. It was called Sprint Spectrum versus Willoth. Now, you don't need to remember the case name, you don't need to write it down. But here's the important part. The standard it created matters, because it set up a two-part test that still shows up in these decisions today. First, is there a meaningful gap in coverage? Not a small inconvenience, not a weak signal in one building, a real gap that's defined by federal standards. Second, is the proposed tower the least intrusive way to fix that gap? In other words, could it be smaller, placed someplace else, designed in a way to have less impact? If the answer is yes, if there's a better, less intrusive option, the board can deny the application. But if there's a real gap, and this is the least intrusive way to fix it, then the town's ability to deny becomes very limited upon legal challenge. And that's the part that we've got to address. Because from the outside, it can feel like this is just a local decision. But it's not. It's a decision operating inside the federal framework. And that's where things like the technical data matters. And only certain technical data. And that's not fair, right? We're all residents. We might say that our home value is the most important factor here, right? But if the courts say that's not the most important factor here, we can all feel like that's not fair. But we've got to work within the system that's been designed. So alternative site analysis matters, because that's what the decision has to be based on. Not just how people feel about it, but whether it meets the standard. And to be clear, local boards still have authority. They can consider aesthetics, they can consider neighborhood character, they can consider environmental impacts. But those concerns have to fit within the broader framework that's allowed by law. They can't override it. So when residents come forward, and you should, right? The most effective thing you can do is make sure your input fits into that structure. Because not all inputs carry the same weight. And that's not about dismissing anyone's concerns. It's about trying to make sure those concerns can actually be used in the decision. Because if they can't be supported within that legal framework that we're all bound by, then they don't hold up. And that's where this connects back to everything we've been talking about. If the process isn't clear, if people don't understand how decisions are actually made, then even when residents show up and speak, their input may not have the impact they expect. And that can be frustrating, right? Because we all care about our houses, our town, our community. And we feel like our perspective should matter, right? And they should. Sadly, the courts disagree, but we now need a way to work within that. Because the process requires more than just showing up. It requires structure and support. And it just requires that what's being said can stand up within the rules the town has to operate under. Because at the end of the day, the process doesn't just determine who gets heard. It determines what actually counts. So after all, let's talk about process and public record and boring stuff. Let's wrap up with something a little more fun. All right, down in the village or up, depending on where you live, we got a number of amazing small businesses on our main street, right? People moving through them throughout the day. And we've got a new place just opened up. Sweet Shenanigans is a new addition. And I stopped by, shot a little video showing you some of their tasty treats. And this is definitely something you want to try out if you want a delicious treat this springtime.
All right, Webster, special little segment here. You can see we're on Main Street. We got a new business just opened up. Sweet Shenanigans. 15 East Main Street, right? Check it out. It's springtime. The weather's getting better. You're walking around the village. You're checking out restaurants. Check out things to do in the village. Get a tasty treat. And let's see what they got. I got my little helper Addison here. That's going to show me some things. Oh, also when you come, special discounts for your 6th order. So get your Sweet Shenanigans loyalty card. And let's see what we got. We're going to try some tasty treats here. And we're going to see what they are. You know, this is like a Food Network show here. Just be busting it out. All right, first up, sugar cookie. This is one of my personal favorites. All right, cannot go wrong. All right, next up, personal favorite, snickerdoodle. That's good, folks. 2 cookies, both delicious. And a third, cheesecake. Shout out to the owner. His personal favorite, like me, regular cheesecake, nothing on it. That is a delicious cheesecake. I mean, delicious. It's hard to even talk. But truly delicious. So folks, check out the new bakery, Sweet Shenanigans, here on Main Street. It's delicious. Support a local business and connect with your community.
Come on, you got to know. We've got an amazing downtown, right? It's not perfect, but it's got charm. It's great. So as the weather gets better, I'm encouraging all of you to check it out. Go for a walk. Take your family. Take your pets. Go for a nice little spring stroll. Enjoy what the village has to offer. Check out the little small businesses. Get a tasty treat or 2 or 3, maybe 4. You know, between the shops and the restaurants, the tasty treats, you can't go wrong, right? It's what makes Webster feel like home. So when you step back and you look at everything we've talked about tonight, there's one common thread. It's not just about the decision. It's about the process behind them. Who gets into the record? Whether the process is consistent, whether decisions are actually read, and whether public input can truly influence outcomes. Because that's what determines what happens in this town. And whether people trust it, if the process feels unclear, people disengage. But when it's clear, people show up, they participate, they invest, and that's the goal. Better decisions, a better town, a better community. A process people understand and believe in. So there's one takeaway, it's this. Pay attention to the process. Keep asking questions. Keep showing up. Make sure your voice becomes part of the record in a way that counts. Because that doesn't make a difference. And it only works if you are part of it. So if you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, sharing, following. Share this episode with a fellow resident. The more we spread this information, the more connected our community comes. Because every step we take, the step towards a better Webster.
You've been watching Webster Now with Garrett Wagner. Join us next time for more local news and updates.